Chapter 9. Breaking Away. Sierra sat next to the body bag containing Carlos as Bellamy's semi traveled down the tunnels. Sierra thought of how, even with the intense situation, when they met back at her family's ranch, she still felt the kindness in the hulk of a man. With each memory of him, Sierra wondered how she would have made it up until now, without losing touch with her humanity, had it not been for his guidance. Even now she could feel the world becoming colder with every fading memory. Occasionally light flickered through bullet holes in the side of the trailer, reminding her of the others in body bags taking the same ride as Carlos. It was then, with the dead as her witness, she swore to swiftly bring judgment upon those who would do harm to others at any cost, and to never forget Carlos. Slowly Sierra unzipped the bag, and as the light rushed into the trailer, it seemed to slow as it reached his face. Sierra felt a tear forming in the corner of her eye just before it raced down her cheek. Almost as if the tear itself felt the agony of her loss, it leaped from her face and landed on Carlos's cheek with a glimmer from the flashing of light. Shocked by the tear, Sierra quickly wiped her face and then unzipped the bag a little more. Pulling the bag to one side, revealing the pocket on his sleeve, Sierra opened it, reached in, and pulled out the object inside. Light glistened off the metal as she read the writing encircling the star in the center. Texas Ranger. I will bring this back to you, my dearest friend, when the job is done. Feeling a slight change in the air pressure, Becker's ears began to perk up, knowing it could only mean one thing this far underground: company. Since being placed in charge by Karnik to inventory the vast storage facility, Becker had known this moment would come. It was only a matter of time before somebody came to find out why they were not getting their supplies, and as his ears began to pick up the light roar of a motor, he knew the time was now. "Get ready!" Sergeant Becker called out to the men as he tried to remain calm. Setting down the clipboard in his hand and picking up his M4 rifle, Becker took a look around. All around him, soldiers followed his order and prepared to defend what they had acquired earlier in the week. As Becker watched them, he thought to himself, "Thank God they know what to do and where to be." Within 60 seconds, soldiers had settled into their fighting positions just as planned. Seeing that everything was ready, Becker thought, for the first time since taking charge of the tunnel, about where he needed to go, as he did everything he could to appear to be right where he should be. Standing on the walkway of the shipping dock, he could hear the roaring of the approaching vehicle increase as the answer of where to be occurred to him: in the tunnel. Jumping down from the safety of the high ledge, Becker began walking with his head held high and rifle casually dangling from under his arm. Walking directly down the center line of the tunnel toward what remained of the tank, Bellamy had crashed through the main door. Becker wondered if his John Wayne impression helped with building the confidence of the men around him. Nearing the tank, Becker began to see the top portion of the truck as it began its climb back up from the underground highway system. Hearing his heart beating in his ears as it picked up in pressure and beats, Becker looked around slowly to see if anyone else could also hear it. Satisfied that he was the only person who could, he turned and focused all his attention on the approaching truck. Stopping a few feet behind a soldier using the tank for cover, Becker looked up to the machine gunner, who had created a nest in the open hole where the turret of the tank had once been. All around him, sandbags had been stacked, leaving only a 6-inch slit for the barrel to fire through facing down the tunnel. Wondering if he should say something, he looked around at the soldiers peering down their rifle sights. Suddenly it came to him. "Nobody fires unless I give the order or we are fired upon. Is that clear?" "Roger," each soldier replied without removing attention from the truck that grew in size with every second that passed. "Sergeant Becker," he heard a voice call from behind him. Looking back over his shoulder, Becker replied, "What is it?" "2 riders are approaching, Sergeant." Becker raised his hand to signal he had heard as the image of an old western crossed his thoughts, and letting out a slight laugh, he mumbled, "Riders approaching." Thankful for the seconds of distraction, Becker turned his attention back to the semi-truck that was now within firing range. Hearing one rifle after another switch to fire when ready, he reminded the soldiers, Nobody fires until I give the command." Bringing his rifle up to his shoulder, Becker knew the time for appearing calm and casual had passed. Now it was time to be ready and prepared to defend. Closely, he watched for any action perceived as threatening, and now that it was almost upon them, he fought the urge to switch the selector from safe to fire. "Wait," Becker said, barely loud enough to hear himself. Pulling the rifle tight into his shoulder and resting his cheek on the buttstock, Becker got a closer look at the semi-truck through the 4-power magnification of the ACOG. There, across the front, where little chrome letters once spelled out the make of the truck, it now read in fluorescent red paint, "Bellamy's Ride." "Hold! Hold! It's ours! Hold!" Becker ordered, relieved they would not have to fight off an attack. At a fast pace, he began moving from one soldier to the next, making sure they knew he had given the command not to fire, and that all was safe, tapping them on the shoulder, saying, "Prepare to move. Don't make that old bastard get down out of that truck to move this hunk of shit." "Sergeant!" The tank engine came to life, drowning out whatever followed, though Becker was sure they were hollering for him. Looking back, he could see a soldier waving for him, standing by 2 others sitting atop horses. Well, I guess it is time to see what they want, he thought before ordering. "Make sure this area is secured and have Bellamy parked near my office. I want to know if the mission was a success the same as you." Relieved with the way things had gone, Becker slung his rifle over his shoulder and began the long walk to the riders. Unwilling to wait, both riders galloped toward Becker, who was still enjoying the idea that there would not be a firefight, and he could get back to inventorying the units. "Shit," Becker said, hearing the huffs of the horses echoing as they ran, swearing it sounded as if they were saying, "Bad news, bad news, bad news," as they clattered on the pavement. "Sir," a slender man called out from atop a horse, holding an envelope high for him to see. Becker shook his head side to side. "Sergeant," he replied back. "What was that, sir?" the rider asked, stopping feet away and still holding the envelope. "I said it's Sergeant!" Becker stated, much louder than before. With confusion on his face, the rider said, "Sorry, sir," while releasing the envelope to Becker, who saw no need in attempting to correct him again. Quickly, Becker opened it, pulled out the single sheet of paper held inside, and began to read. While reading the contents of the envelope for the second time, Becker listened as the tank motor revved and its tracks clinked and clanked, moving to one side while the semi-truck passed. Reaching the end of the page at the same time as the tank had finished returning to its spot as a barricade in the middle of the road, Becker looked up with all color drained from his face. "We have been invaded?" Becker asked in disbelief. "Sergeant Becker," a concerned voice came to him from the direction of the semi-truck. Looking over, Becker recognized the soldier from the barricade, and after looking at his name tag, he addressed him. "What is it, Specialist Johnson?" With a sad voice, Johnson replied, "Sir, it's Bellamy." Becker thought back to when Bellamy had driven the tank through the outer door of the tunnels during the attack, but mostly of how Bellamy hollered with excitement. Then he remembered how scared he was when the turret vanished from above his head. "Johnson, what is it? The grumpy bastard fall?" Becker asked, thankful for the distraction of what he had just learned. Hearing his name barked out, he realized he had become lost in thought. "Sorry, Sergeant, but Bellamy is dead," Johnson said grimly. Becker's first thought was that the old soldier's heart must have given out, but after looking over to the truck with its countless bullet holes, the thought faded fast. "Sergeant, I spoke with the driver, and he said they are carrying the dead from the mission, totaling 56 in all, counting the Texas Ranger," Johnson reported. "Damn it. Okay, let them on through and make sure they do not have a problem clearing the damaged door at the entrance. One last thing, inform the men up there to be on their toes. The armory was attacked by some gang using wooden armor vans. Oh, and we have been invaded by China, so keep an eye out for that. That is all," Becker said, feeling a little overwhelmed. Not quite grasping what Becker had just said, Johnson responded, "We have been invaded by China? We have to deal with those assholes now?" "Yes. Now focus on getting these soldiers laid to rest." Removing the rubber coating from a piece of wire that once operated the lights inside the trailer, Sierra twisted the copper strands between her fingers, binding them together. Satisfied that it was as tight as it would go, she placed it on Carlos's chest as though he was helping with her project. Next, Sierra removed the leather holster from around her waist, and with the tip of the knife from her pocket, she began drilling 2 holes marked by 2 scratch marks. Satisfied they were sufficient, Sierra picked up the copper strand and fished it through the holes, followed by the pin on the back of Carlos's ranger badge. With the pin through the hole and locked into the clasp, she pressed through the second hole. Sierra used the copper wire to make it a little more secure. Once finished, she looked up. "Carter," she addressed the only other living person. "Yeah?" Carter replied. "Are we close?" Sierra asked, running her hand across Carlos's cold cheek for the last time, before slowly zipping the body bag up once again. Carter had been watching for landmarks ever since leaving the tunnels and knew exactly where they were. It had been easy to figure out after seeing the destroyed UN vehicles covered with bullet holes alongside the highway. "The exit for the armory is just ahead," Carter said loud enough for his voice to carry over the sound of air rushing through the bullet holes. Sierra didn't reply with thanks or give any other sign she had heard, so Carter took the fact that she did not have her pistol in his face as a sign that she must have. Rising to her feet with her back against the wall of the trailer for support, Sierra worked the holster belt back around her waist. Pulling the 2 ends together, running one end through the metal buckle, she pulled it tight around her waist. Bending slightly over to her left leg, she took hold of the 2 leather straps hanging from the bottom of the holster, pulling them tight around her leg and tying them together just to the inside of her thigh. Swinging over to her right, Sierra stared at the Texas Ranger badge she had just fastened to her belt, while she secured the right side around her leg the same as the left. "We're there," Carter informed her, timing it just seconds before the driver began slowing down for the front gate checkpoint. Once stopped, Sierra and Carter could clearly hear the voices of soldiers as they came around to the rear of the trailer. "What? They got Carlos?" Sierra heard right before the doors opened to a surprised Sergeant Smith. Smith stood there looking up at Sierra in the back of the trailer, unable to form words or even a grunt. Smith knew how close the two had been and just how insensitive his comment sounded. As he searched for the words to say, his eyes focused on the badge shining from her belt. Knowing there was no use in apologizing, Smith pointed at the badge. "I have some shoe polish that will keep the shine from attracting the enemy, if you would like to try it." "No. I'll just kill him first," Sierra said coldly. Though Smith found her to be one of the most competent women he had ever laid eyes on, he could not shake the feeling that she wanted to kill him for suggesting dulling the shine. Without saying another word, Smith closed the trailer doors and then signaled for his men to let the truck through. With the doors closed, Carter looked over to Sierra, feeling as if he had to say something. You know, everyone knew and loved the man. I didn't know him but a day, and his gigantic chuckle echoing like a siren was the first thing I liked about him. If I wanted to know where he was, I didn't look for him. I listened for his laugh, Sierra said, remembering the last time she heard his laugh. Slowly, the truck rolled forward, heading down the long drive to the new cemetery at the highest point of the hill. Through bullet holes, Sierra saw movement behind the semi and leaned forward, placing her forearm just above one of the holes to steady herself as she got a better look. Gathering in the road and walking along as the semi moved up the hill were at least 50 people, with others coming from all sides to join them. Sierra fought to push back the emotions bubbling up inside her, and without realizing it, she slid her thumb to rest just behind Carlos's badge. With her fingers moving side to side over the surface of the badge, she pictured the first day she had met Carlos, and how strong the feeling was that he was a good man. Now, looking through the bullet hole at those who gathered to bury the dead, she felt she was looking out over a crowd of good men and women. Once at the top with the doors of the trailer opened, Sierra looked over to Carter and spoke calmly, as if she was trying not to wake the dead. "Get us something to dig with. I'm going to claim a spot for him." Jumping down from the trailer, Sierra knew just where she thought Carlos would want to be, overlooking the Missouri River. He had often commented to her how beautiful it was, and no matter how bad things were getting in the world, the water still flowed, making peaceful, soothing sounds downstream. Now she stood overlooking the river on the spot her dearest friend would rest for eternity. "I found a pick and shovel," Carter said softly as he drove the shovel into the ground, keeping the pick at the ready. "Anywhere here will do," Sierra replied, not taking her eyes off the river. With Carlos laid to rest and her brother Robert off on another mission, nothing was going to stop Sierra from moving forward with her plans. Sierra stood under the shower head protruding from the bottom of a barrel above her. Pulling down on a rope released the water from the barrel above. Sierra did her best to relax and let the events of the day wash away from her goosebumps-covered body as the lukewarm water raced to her feet. Sierra looked up and concentrated only on the water as it covered her face and gathered in her thick brown hair, causing it to gently pull on her scalp. Taking a relaxing, deep breath in, Sierra tilted her head down toward her feet, releasing the breath slowly. The feeling of relaxation quickly vanished as she opened her eyes and saw the red tent of water as it ran from her hair and over her breasts. Once again she was filled with anger, realizing the red was Carlos's blood that had dried in her hair. Releasing the rope to the on-off valve above, Sierra grabbed her clothes and quickly dressed, not in the military uniform she had worn, but her own. Watching Sierra coming toward him from down the corridor with Carter close behind, Sergeant Burns could not help admiring her beauty. He pictured her going to a square dance due to her tight jeans tucked into cowboy boots, and then there was her white and red checkered flannel shirt, half-buttoned with a white tank top underneath. It was not the way she pulled her hair through the old ball cap or the shirt he liked the most, but the way she tied it in the front, slightly exposing her tight abs. Though Burns thought her very attractive, the closer she came, the bigger the pistols looked on each hip. Walking up to the counter, Sierra knew just what she wanted. "Give me 1,000 rounds of .357 Magnum and 2,000 rounds of .556. Reluctantly, Burns replied, "Do you have a request form?" Before he even asked the question, he felt his attraction to her turn to fear. "Let her have it," Burns heard Sergeant Smith say from behind him. With a smile, Burns said, "I'll be right back with it." He then turned to fill her request. Walking up to the window with 2 olive-green rucksacks, Smith placed them on the counter between Sierra and himself. "You could probably use these also. I packed them, and they are full of items you're going to need. Sorry to hear about Carlos, but soon as I heard he had passed, I knew you would be leaving." Without saying another word, Smith returned to what he was doing in the supply room, while Sierra took the bags and handed one to Carter. After a few minutes, Burns returned with Sierra's request in 2 bags. "These canvas bags should fit in your saddlebags. .357 in this one, .556 in here," Burns said, holding each bag up as he indicated what was contained inside. Taking the bags, Sierra turned and walked off without saying another word. "Where to now?" Carter asked as they exited the main building of the armory, curious as to what the plan was. He had waited to discover the plan since, jumping in the semi-trailer to find out. Looking around with only the moonlight to see by, Sierra said, "Now I get, big boy." Carter felt a little more lost after having his question answered, and it only created a greater one that he felt had to be asked. Who the hell is Big Boy? Without answering his question, Sierra looked to the top of the hill where they had buried Carlos earlier. "I have to say goodbye first," she said to Carter, placing her hand on Carlos's badge and rubbing it with her fingers, hoping to feel a little closer to him as she began walking up the hill to his grave, feeling as if he was calling out to her. Nearing Carlos's grave, Sierra could hear somebody sniffle and understood it must be someone mourning the loss of a loved one. Listening, Sierra wondered if one day she too could allow those feelings to show as she stopped next to the grave of the loved one she had lost. Sierra stood looking down at the freshly turned dirt and out to where the moonlight reflected off the river. Seeing the silhouette of a young girl on her knees with the river behind her, she figured out why she felt Carlos was calling out to her. Directing Carter to wait, Sierra walked over to where the girl was kneeling, believing that Carlos wanted her to help the girl, like Carlos helped her in the beginning. "Who did you lose?" Sierra asked in the gentlest voice she could. With a sniff, the girl wiped her eyes and looked up. "My father. They brought him back today." Sniffing again, she then burst out once more in tears. Sierra could feel something holding her there and keeping her from turning and walking away. Unable to fight against the force keeping her standing next to the crying girl, she asked, "What was his name?" With another sniffle and more tears, she replied, "Chad Francis." Sierra began to grow impatient with the crying girl and thought it was time for tough love. Looking at the girl draped over the wooden cross marking her father's grave, she began, "Okay, listen up. You're done crying. Stand up and tell me what your name is." Standing up, the girl barked back at Sierra, Katie Francis, and he was my father. How dare you tell me I've cried enough?" Sierra responded rapidly, "Just over there in the ground lies my dearest friend who saved me when my family was murdered by the government at the beginning of this shit. The hat on my head was bought for me by my mother, who died when I was 10. My brother, who left his career in the army to help my father raise me, is now out on a suicide mission to help someone else. When is it time to stop crying and move on? I think I would know, and that is why I dare." No longer crying, Katie took one last sniffle and stood in front of Sierra, not really sure what to do next. "What do you want?" Sierra wondered the same thing and thought that there could only be one reason she was unable to walk away. "Can you shoot?" she asked Katie, noticing the strange pistol belt around her waist. Though Sierra could not see it, a slight smile appeared on Katie's face. "Hell yes! My father and I were 3-gun champions." "Well then, grab your shit and come with me if you want to get a little payback. But there will be no more crying," Sierra said, signaling for Carter as she began the long walk to the stables, where her large Palomino horse named Big Boy waited for her return.